Hello, everybody. Welcome to the WIBA Hall of Fame induction for 2025. Thank you so much for being here, whether you're in person or online, or if you're viewing this later. We appreciate the gift of your attention and your time. The mission of the Hall of Fame is to honor the accomplishments and lives of women who've been pioneers in the field of behavior analysis and to create a historic record to educate behavior analysts on their contributions. We value learning about and sharing the history of our field and the history of the women who have helped shape the field, but whose contributions were not always recognized. It's important to take into account the social and historical context in which people in the past lived and worked. In some cases, the accomplishments of our honorees are all the more astonishing in light of the barriers they faced. I believe we can best shape the future when we have a good understanding of the past. This understanding includes not just the people who were there and the actions they took, but the meta-contingencies at play in the context in which all of this occurred. To be considered for induction into the Hall of Fame, a candidate would have 30+ years of experience in the field and be retired or semi-retired. We consider scholarly contributions and recognition and awards, as well as the work that a candidate has done in support of others in leadership, mentorship, and teaching. And we select trailblazers who serve as role models for those of us who come after. As you learn about the inductees, listen for their stories. The women you'll learn about today have had an enormous influence, and there's much here that will inspire. This year we'll be celebrating the 5th class of inductees. All members of the selection committee are women, and all are appointed by the chair. Currently, I serve in that role. Members serve for a few years, and then others are rotated on to give people the opportunity to participate. And doing the research to learn about these women has been incredibly interesting and fun, especially where we've teamed up to do this together. We work to find people who know the inductees best and have conversations with them so we can learn what we wouldn't be able to find in an article, chapter, or book. This has been a really great experience, and if you have an interest in history and you'd like to contribute, please let any of us know. We established the Hall of Fame in 2021, and we induct between 4 and 6 new members each year. And we collect photos and memorabilia as a living history display to share the accomplishments of these women. 2021 was the first class of inductees. They're listed here from earliest birth year. These include Bea Barrett, Martha Bernal, Eve Siegel, and Judy Favell. And Dr. Favell joined us in Nashville for that event. In 2022, there were 6 inductees: Ellie Reese, Barb Etzel, Frances Horowitz, Beth Sulzer-Azaroff, Julie Vargas, and Gwendolyn Cartledge. Dr. Cartledge joined us in person for that event, and Dr. Vargas joined remotely. In 2023, the 5 inductees were Janet Ellis, Judy LeBlanc, Sigrid Glenn, Jan Sheldon, Maria Ruiz, and Dr. Glenn joined us remotely for that event. In 2024, the inductees were Carolina Borey, Betty Hart, Ellie Pinkston, Sandra Harris, and Laura Schreibman, and we had the honor of Dr. Schreibman joining us last year. And the list of inductees is getting long. I am really pleased. Linda and some others had this vision initially, and I'm really pleased with where this project has gone. We are grateful for the opportunity to share with you the inductee class for 2025. You'll be hearing about Susan Meyer Markle, Karen Pryor, Patricia Krantz, Lynn McClannahan, and Nancy Neef. And we are thrilled to have Nancy Neef joining us here today. So now let's begin with Mirari El-Coro, who will tell us about Susan Meyer Markle.
Thank you, Chada. Hello, everybody. It is my honor to speak today to you about Susan Meyer Markle. And I want to start by giving you a little bit of an idea of where the information that I'm going to be presenting to you comes from, but also that's intertwined with the people who made this possible. And first, I want to thank the WIBA Hall of Fame Committee, Ed Morris at University of Kansas, who helped me quite a bit to do this research, and also to contact Dr. Joe Lang, who is a mentee of Susan Meyer Markle, and he was generous to correspond with me, and you'll see that today. Audrey Waters, who is the author of a book called Teaching Machines, The History of Personalized Learning, and here is where I mostly learn about Susan Meyer Markle, and the Harvard Archives that gave me access to correspondence between Susan Meyer Markle and B.F. Skinner. So I'm going to give you kind of a sample that is focused on Markle's experience academically, a little bit about her personal life. She was born Susan Rogers, and keep in mind there's going to be some switching of last names that I'll point out. She was born November 11th, 1928 in Buffalo, New York. And here's a quote about her daughter of Alden and Ruth Rogers. Her first two marriages to author Meyer and David Markle gave the name that most of us know her from as, and I'll refer to her throughout the talk about as Markle. Her third marriage was with Phil Tiedemann, led some of us to refer to her as Susan Meyer Markle Tiedemann, but that was getting complicated. And Susan had something to say about those names. Always publish under your maiden name. At Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts, Markle completed undergraduate studies in math, history, music, art, and literature. From 1956 to 1960, Markle was a graduate student in experimental psychology at University of Buffalo in New York. And according to the literature, she was the first woman to be admitted in that program, and her mentor was Donald Bullock. As she had completed her graduate work but had done all by her dissertation, she was hired as a research associate and then fellow at Harvard University, working with B.F. Skinner as the only woman in his Teaching Machines project. And I'll come back to that. She wasn't just the only woman, she was a visionary. Then she moved to New York. She completed her dissertation with data collected within the Teaching Machines project, moved to New York to develop the National Instruction Standards at the Center for Program Instruction, a nonprofit organization with Ken Komoski and Lou Eigen. In 1962, she held her first academic position, an assistant professor of psychology at University of California in Los Angeles. There, she worked with Art Lumsdale, co-editor of Teaching Machines and Programmed Instruction. And she published a lot, and I'm just going to give you some things, but the book that keeps being referenced by people who studied her and has continued the work in instructional design always mentioned good frames and bad. Grammar of Frame Writing in 1964, and this book is the first detailed collection of program instruction. From 1965 to 1993, she held a position as professor of psychology and director of instructional resources at University of Illinois in Chicago. So in 93, she received the emeritus status at University of Chicago. During the time that she was in Chicago, she was the 5th president, but the first woman president of the National Society for Program Instruction, which is known today as the International Society for Performance Improvement. Now, Markle she's not only the pioneer in instructional design, she was also a jazz scholar. In 1982, as of 1982, she was already in the board of directors of the Jazz Institute of Chicago. And in the 1990s, she was the president of the Jazz Institute of Chicago, where she remained a writer, educator, and was a video editor for Jazz Times magazine. She died in December of 2008 in Maryland. So as I said, this was kind of a quick timeline. I want to stop at different points of that timeline. The Teaching Machines project, I told you would come back. At Harvard, Skinner led a program that included Susan Mayer Markle, the only woman in the team designing teaching machines and programs. So this is the emerging work for what was known later as program instruction. And this picture, which is courtesy of Dr. Lang, shows Susan Mayer in the middle. You can appreciate already she's the only woman. In the back, it's B.F. Skinner. Now, I still don't know the names of any of these other men. They're not in the Teaching Machines project, but if any of you has an idea, please let me know. But you can see, right, this picture. And according to Dr. Lang, this was early years of Markle. Within the Teaching Machines project, Susan Mayer Markle was working on what was called program instruction. So you have the machine, which is in a way the hardware, but it's the programming really what matters. The machine doesn't really do the work, it's the programming. And program instruction was individualized instruction. Markle likened it to the work as a tutor, a master of intellectual teasing who adjusts the lesson to her students' needs, but also challenges the student to keep moving forward. Each student was now to have his own private tutor, encased in a small box. According to Skinner, the technology of teaching emerged from the experimental analysis of behavior, yielding two highly influential products that were not restricted to education: teaching machines and program instruction. And according to Holland, the teaching machines was the first step. Teaching machines and program instruction was the first step into what we call applied behavior analysis. Waters, who is the author of the book, on the top image, you're seeing the cover of the book, Teaching Machines, by Audrey Waters, published in 2021. Waters highlights the work of Markle as most significant in the development of program instruction, but then and now, women were professionally undermined and men were normally credited instead. Markle was given the role of secretary at the Teaching Machines lab at Harvard. Quote from Skinner, "The secretarial role fell to her, Markle, according to the standard of the time, as the only woman in the group." Now, Markle, who did not only write about program instruction, but also dedicated her time writing about the history of the Teaching Machines program, below the cover of the book, you see the first page of an article called Teaching Machines and Program Instruction, the Harvard Teaching Machines Project, the First 100 Days. So Markle writes on the first page of that article, a secretary who was selected not because of the expertise in the subjects under discussion, but in keeping with standardized conceptions of what a secretary should look like. At the Harvard Archives, I had the pleasure of holding with my hands correspondence between Markle and B.F. Skinner. And this is, just to give you some context, a response of Markle to Skinner asking her what she had been up to after the Teaching Machines project. She had been up to a lot. And so he was writing one of his autobiographical volumes. So Markle responded. This is an excerpt of a bigger response, and I'll tell you what I want to highlight here. The vocabulary materials that Debbie and I used at Shady Hill that formed the basis of my dissertation, so Markle speaking about the dissertation, she wrote, "The first, although Jim Evans let claim to being the first, until as sexism went down the drain, he asked the date of mine." So again, I'm highlighting some of the issues concerning sexism that she had to deal with and that she wrote about. So these data were further developed and ended up as WORDS, a program published by Science Research Associates in 1962. I also changed my name by marrying Dave Markle. So many people do not know that the Meyer Dame that you mention on occasion still exists. So I want to highlight, there are many other issues, the changing of the names that makes it difficult to track a legacy, but also undermines, in a way, her name, and that was expected at the time as a woman getting married, but also the fact that her dissertation being the first was not credited until later, that a man in the Teaching Machines project had assumed that position. And more about the legacy of Markle, Skinner, these are two quotes of people who have recognized the work of Markle. Skinner may have introduced the concept of program instruction to the public, but it was educational practitioners and instructional designers like Markle who carried the concept into popular usage and developed the conventions by which program instruction is applied. Another Markle note that goes unappreciated is that she edited Skinner's book, Verbal Behavior. Skinner gives her a brief acknowledgement in the book as Mrs. Meyer, the Meyer in Susan, Meyer Markle that we know. I mentioned before her book, which is still considered the first compilation of program instruction, Good Frames and Bad, and I want to highlight too that its first publication was in English, but as you see superimposed on the cover of the book is a translation in Spanish. So another quote, she became well known later for the quality of her work, her incisive analysis, and her quick wit. Her book, Good Frames and Bad, was one of the best publications in program instruction. It showed good and bad frames to illustrate principles of learning and program instruction. Here's a list, and this is just a selection. Just wanted to show you, the list gets longer. I highlighted good frames and bad, and as you can see from the titles of these publications, program instruction is quite common. So Markle as mentor. This is a quote from a mentee, Dr. Jo Lang. She was always generous with her time and willing to discuss her new research and ideas. Her understanding of stimulus control and the programming of complex repertoires to this very day exceeded that of most behavior analysts, experimental and applied. And you can see that this quote is really recent. And I also found a compilation of writings in memoriam of Susan Meyer Markle, published in 2011. Many of her colleagues remember her many strengths in these writings celebrating her life. I just selected a few to share with you. Her work was fundamental, clear, and focused. Her contributions to us all are legion and endure the test of time. She helped make the International Society of Performance Improvement credible as well as our field. Susan was a tough-minded researcher who continued her personal quest for useful answers. She was also a hell of a lot of fun. We also shared a love of jazz. Sue was a jazz fan who knew just about every great jazz musician I had ever heard of, and whose knowledge of jazz, its history, what it was about, how it should be played and sung was encyclopedic. She was also quite something on the dance floor. So just a little bit more about this facet of her life. Markle, as I mentioned before, was a jazz scholar, including being president of the Jazz Institute of Chicago. And this is a quote by Jensen. There and at other jazz outposts, she struck up a friendship with Duke Ellington, members of the Modern Jazz Quartet, and others, her son said. So I want to close with yet another quote. This is a photograph also shared by Jo Lang. This is Susan Meyer Markle at ABAI, at a lunch at the Association for Behavior Analysis International. Like many women of the era, and unfortunately lingers today, Sue had to be super Markle, which she indeed was. I was extremely fortunate to be taken under her wing. I was determined to please her. I understand I was in the presence of genius. Thank you so much.
Karen Pryor's contributions were so wide-ranging that it's difficult to characterize her with just a few words. She was a biologist, an ethologist, a writer, a teacher, and a trailblazing animal trainer who brought Skinner's discoveries about operant behavior out of the laboratory and into everyday life. Through her clear, practical, and popular writing, she helped to make positive reinforcement accessible to the general public. She showed that Skinner's operant psychology could be applied broadly to behavior across species and settings. As a result of her work, we've seen improvements in instructional practices, care, and quality of life, extending from dolphins and other marine mammals and zoo animals and their trainers, keepers, and veterinarians to companion, show, and working animals, parents and children, educators, athletes, and healthcare professionals. Karen Pryor's career was long and inspiring. Her publication record spanned more than 50 years, with her final works appearing into the 8th decade of her life. On January 4th of this year, she died at the age of 92. Karen Leanne Wiley was born in Manhattan in 1932. She was an only child. Her father was a prolific and influential, well-known author, and her mother was a fashion model and antiques dealer. She's said in interviews that from age 8 or so, she was a naturalist. And it's been said that as a child, she learned the Latin name of every butterfly in her neighborhood in Connecticut. Karen spent summers in Florida and the Bahamas, and in her teenage years, she spent time at the Lerner Marine Lab, watching and collecting coral reef fish from a glass-bottom boat. She noted that she did see some dolphins on these trips, but they weren't entirely exciting to her. When she enrolled at Cornell, her first choice for a major was ornithology, but the professor told her he would not accept a female student as there was nowhere for her to use the toilet in the woods. And though she wanted to be a biologist, the way biology was taught was also not quite what she was looking for. So she majored in English literature, and she took as many science classes as she could. Karen Pryor later moved to Hawaii with her husband, who she met at Cornell. He studied sharks, and over the next 5 years, she had 3 children, wrote a book, and attended the University of Hawaii at Manoa. While she was there, she studied fish, oceanography, and marine invertebrate zoology, and she also conducted research for her book. Later, she studied zoology and behavioral biology at Rutgers University and NYU. After a few years, she was ready to move on to the next chapter of her life in Washington State and opted not to complete the degree requirements. She did, however, complete and publish influential work that had been planned to be her dissertation. Karen and her husband bought a cabin on the beach with a little land. In addition to her work as a mother and student, she raised pheasants and Welsh ponies, and her husband was away much of the time on ships, completing his studies. At the time, there was nowhere to keep sharks on Oahu, and she recalled that these were difficult years. With the goal of coming back home to study, in 1958, Tap Pryor, her husband, sketched a plan in the sand for an oceanarium. The project included sites for research as well as education and entertainment in the form of a dolphin show for tourists. And here's that book she published, Between Babies, in 1963. She wrote this book in part because she felt the advice given to women about breastfeeding was insufficient. She saw that breastfeeding was, at least in part, a learned skill, and noted that the medical practices of the day didn't help with this learning, but in fact interfered with the process. The book has sold over 1.5 million copies. It's been continuously in print since its release, and the 4th and current edition was revised and co-authored by her daughter, Gail Pryor. Meanwhile, at the Oceanarium, Sea Life Park was set to launch. Meanwhile, the Oceanarium was set to launch. It was called Sea Life Park, and at the Oceanarium, there was a crisis brewing. The facility had hired 3 dolphin trainers and provided them with a 20-page manual on operant conditioning written by Ron Tour, who was a student of Skinner's. As it turned out, the trainers didn't understand the information in the manual, which was rather technical, and Karen Pryor reports that the dolphins had trained them to give them fish for nothing. But the show was due to open in 3 months, and they needed a new plan, and very quickly. So the leadership at the park knew that Karen had trained a pony and a dog, and they gave her the manual and asked her to consider training the dolphins and creating the show. She had no intention of being involved with Sea Life Park beyond tasks expected from the wife of a founder. But after reading the manual describing how to establish operant behavior, she was hooked. So she agreed to work as the lead trainer. She made some adjustments from the manual, removing the more punitive guidance like contingent food deprivation. And she's pointed out that working with dolphins requires reliance on building behavior with positive reinforcement because there's no use in delivering a punisher to an animal that can just swim away. She conducted the training with a whistle, an auditory conditional reinforcer that can be delivered at the very moment of the behavior she wanted to reinforce, and buckets of fish. This was the start of what would come to be known as clicker training. Karen Pryor took Skinner's finding of the importance of the immediacy of reinforcement, and she applied it to the real world. And she also leaned on her experience with theater at Cornell, and she wrote the shows. She corresponded with Skinner, who served as a mentor to her, and she later hired his daughter when he asked his daughter, Deborah, who became a trainer. Skinner visited the park and attended a show, and Karen Pryor made sure that his daughter served as the lead trainer on that day. Incidentally, another influential scientist corresponded with and mentored her and also visited a show, ethologist Konrad Lorenz, who popularized the phenomenon of imprinting, famously demonstrating the behavior with ducklings. Pryor served as the lead trainer for almost 10 years and enjoyed her time with the animals. In 1992, she was invited to give the presidential address at the ABA convention. She spoke about how much can be learned from animals, their preferences and tendencies through the use of reinforcement, which she considered a kind of communication. And she gave a powerful story about the treatment of sea lions, which have been in captivity and trained for hundreds of years, back to the Romans, she said. They were known to be difficult to train and aggressive, they didn't like to be touched, and they didn't produce offspring in captivity. They would work for food, but they were kept in a state of deprivation to the point of chronic undernourishment, and it was standard practice to use physical punishment. At some point when these animals were housed at oceanariums, they were assigned to dolphin trainers who used conditioned reinforcement and stopped depriving them of food. And then a few things happened. Their disposition improved, they grew in size, they began not to mind being touched by the humans they liked, and they reproduced. Over 3 decades from the time that she introduced the training method she used with dolphins at Sea Life Park, sea lions have come to be known as trustworthy animals. As a result of Karen Pryor's work, animals in captivity are now handled more humanely, and this transformation has changed standards for animal care around the world. The first experimental study she published in a peer-reviewed journal was this one in the Experimental Analysis of Behavior. This is one of our flagship journals in behavior analysis. It's a fascinating study. It was the first empirical demonstration that novel behavior could be produced by a particular history of reinforcement. The study was important because it contradicted the belief that reinforcement only made behavior more stereotyped or rigid. And it laid the groundwork for later research on reinforced variability, creativity, and problem solving. After the end of her time at Sea Life Park, Pryor thought she'd completed her work with dolphins and had moved on. She moved on to work in advertising and a little bit of journalism, but the work with dolphins was not done with her. There was a new method for fishing for tuna, and dolphins were being caught in nets and drowning. She was asked by the tuna industry if she could help them learn how to prevent this, and she did so, making recommendations and, importantly, bringing together the relevant parties to agree on a plan. She never expected to see the fishing for herself, though she was interested in seeing how that looked. Women were not allowed on tuna boats, but later she had the opportunity to study dolphins in the wild from a research vessel that went alongside tuna boats, and she was able to document their social behavior. Again, she thought she was done with dolphins until she was asked to accept a presidential appointment from the Reagan White House to serve as one of 3 commissioners who managed funding, communication, and regulations related to the well-being of marine mammals like seals, dolphins, and polar bears. And you can see here that her initial response to this invitation was not one of enthusiasm. But she did the work and made contributions. After years of wanting to publish a book on operant conditioning and how it can be applied to problems of human behavior in daily life, Pryor published Don't Shoot the Dog. She didn't like the name assigned by the publisher, but she accepted it as it was designed to maximize the reach of the book. And the book was a success. Several editions have been published in English, many more published in a wide range of other languages. And though Don't Shoot the Dog is the most well-known of her written work, it's one of many contributions that she's made. And I want to pull this out because I think it's always interesting to see how the lives and work of the Hall of Famers that we now have many of have intersected over the years. And so I found that the foreword to this book was written by 2022 inductee Ellie Reese. And it was nice to see that connection. A consistent theme across her books seems to be to inspire the reader to think about the possibility of influencing behavior with positive reinforcement. She told compelling stories with an engaging style and offered practical guidance for anyone who wanted to help others or themselves through behavior change. Karen Pryor may have been most well known for her contributions to training companion animals, and dogs in particular. Here she used a small device that makes a sound when pressed between the finger and thumb of a trainer. Probably everybody's aware of this. It's known as a clicker. In addition to contributing to others by writing books, when she saw a need, she created structures and organizations to support the changes she wanted to evoke. She brought trainers and training to ABAI, started a publishing company, and was an early adopter of web-based sharing of information, including blog posts. She created organizations to suit various missions, including Clicker Expo, an annual meeting where thousands of attendees have learned to use positive reinforcement. And the systems that she set up continue to thrive. Her work was recognized during her life, and she received many awards and honors for her writing, teaching, and training across contexts and audiences and in relation to different problems, though I don't think this was a motivation for her work. Julie Vargas, Skinner's daughter and another Hall of Famer from 2022, attended a couple of Clicker Expo events, and she described these. She would get up on stage with a dog she'd never seen before from one of the people who were there in the audience, and somebody would say something for her to shape. She'd do it right there, no hesitation. I remember myself teaching things as a demonstration, and I always thought, I hope it works, which is so silly because it always works, but she had absolutely no fear. When asked what her father would think of Pryor's work, Vargas said he always believed that the true test of any science was the practical applications that could be derived from it. And he would see, and did see actually, the work that Karen Pryor was doing as a verification of the principles that he had researched. Tag Teach, or teaching with acoustical guidance, is a teaching and training method that uses positive reinforcement and an audible marker like a clicker to shape behavior. It's grounded in the same behavioral principles as animal clicker training, but adapted specifically for humans, and it's been used in many applications. For example, one that I won't be able to show you, but there was a fantastic study that compared surgeons learning to tie sutures. One group of surgeons were trained using tag teaching, so shaping reinforcement, conditional reinforcement for those moments that were reinforceable. And the other was just modeling, watching somebody do it and repeating what they did, and guess which one was the winner. This is, not a surprise, but it is interesting and I think important because it shows how much room there is for us to expand some of these techniques and expand the use of reinforcement across many areas where training is something that would be really useful. Karen Pryor's work is a model of empathy in practice. And this is an excerpt from a letter that Karen Pryor wrote to her staff, guiding them on how to handle situations where clients complain that their pets aren't getting along with each other. And I'll read this one aloud. Animals, like people, have preferences for other individuals that can only partly be explained by reinforcement and for which we have no particular evolutionary explanation either. You can insist on good manners, but you can't insist on love. I think we can reinforce friendly behavior among our pets and thus reduce bickering. I also think we can give them a right to their own preferences. The tired old cat should have an elevated box to retreat to when she doesn't want to be pestered. The busy young cat should have a strenuous targeting games to use up her energy. And all are entitled to some individual attention and downtime as well. Where attachment exists, though, we can at least respect it and give those friends time together whenever it's possible. Happy clicking, Karen. It seems like we'd do well to bring this approach to our own work and probably our relationships as well, for that matter. In a meeting that was held in remembrance of her mother, Gail Pryor shared, that her mother's reinforcer was the great pleasure of feeling wonder. Every day, from the moment she woke up until she was asleep again, Karen was an absolute wonder addict. And sometimes it was the wonder of the first green shoots of spring, or the tenderness of a perfectly braised pot of stew, or the usually quiet grandchild who suddenly cracked up the whole family at the dinner table. So whatever it was, Karen saw it and celebrated it for the joy of the moment, but also so that everyone around her could capture that moment too. It's difficult to capture in just a few words the many roles Karen Pryor played as she pushed forward the global impact of her work, an impact that continues to spread through the countless people she influenced. What she gave us is a model for changing behavior that's both effective and deeply compassionate. Karen Pryor showed us that the most powerful approach to behavior change begins with understanding, recognizing the biological context and learning history of the individual, paying attention to what matters to them in the moment, and using a gentle approach to promoting and rewarding their success. Her work demonstrated that a scientific approach to behavior change is not distinct from an empathetic one. In fact, the two are inseparable.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Dawn Townsend, and I am not part of the WIBA committee, but was asked to come here today and talk to all of you about Drs. Patricia Krantz and Lynn McClannahan. I'd like to thank the WIBA Hall of Fame organizers for this opportunity. It is a privilege to be here at this conference and to honor two of the most amazing women, scientists, clinicians, and kind-hearted people I have ever met, Drs. Patricia Krantz and Lynn McClannahan. When Janet Lunn asked to talk to me about Pat and Lynn and to consider presenting on behalf of the WIBA Hall of Fame Committee about their success and commitment to our field, I was very excited and a little bit nervous. These women are beyond deserving of induction into WIBA's Hall of Fame. They embody the very essence of WIBA's mission of empowering, celebrating, and mentoring women in the field of behavior analysis. I, in fact, am one of those individuals who had the great opportunity to be mentored by Pat and Lynn. Since the early 1990s, they instructed, prompted, and reinforced my behavior, and I could not have been luckier. Although, to be honest, at times, I thought these women might have been asking for the impossible. But you see, they were always striving for excellence. They were passionate about the science of behavior analysis, and they were dedicated to the future success of every person they taught, mentored, and truly graced with their presence. But don't trust my words. No, Pat and Lynn would never allow that. Let me show you some facts about them so that you can analyze the information and come to your own conclusions about their contributions to behavior analysis. Both Pat and Lynn come from humble beginnings, and although because of their great work together, they are often thought of as a pair like salt and pepper, they were two distinct women with different early life experiences. But like all pairs, they complemented one another and acted in a harmonious way to bring about the best in each other and those around them. Pat was born in a small town in Iowa and was the youngest of 5 children. It is no wonder that she learned how to interact effectively with others, always knowing exactly what to say, how to resolve problems, and how to keep that team moving forward in a meaningful way. Early on, Pat demonstrated, sorry, I've lost my cursor here. Early on, Pat demonstrated her passion about things that she enjoyed and was good at. She had a love of music and, believe it or not, was a talented pianist and operatic trained singer. She excelled in all that she did, including gardening and cooking. There we go, sorry about that. Lynn was also born in Iowa, but in Mitchellville. She was one of 2 children, and she displayed strong observational and analytical skills at an early age. Lynn loved to be outdoors. She enjoyed hiking and kayaking, and really any opportunity to try something new and exciting. Despite her demure presence, she was a fan of new experiences. She had used any opportunity to go and experience excitement and to use her excellent photography skills. When Pat and Lynn met in the 1970s at the University of Kansas, their two separate paths soon began to move in a highly coordinated way as they connected and started a partnership that would last a lifetime in every aspect of their lives. Although women were not highly, sorry, I don't know what's happening to my computer up here. I've lost my mouse.
Laterally.
Here? I had to get rid of this thing, though. I don't know what is happening. So sorry, guys. Okay, there we go. Although women were not highly encouraged to go to college in the 1960s, and were instead encouraged to focus on family and motherhood, Pat and Lynn would not be swayed. They both pursued college degrees and went on to graduate school ultimately. Pat began her studies in sociology at Grandview College and got her bachelor's degree at Drake University in 1964. She then pushed the envelope to show those around her that women could achieve and completed her master's degree at the University of Wisconsin in 1968. And to demonstrate that she was not to be stopped, Pat went on to obtain a PhD from the University of Kansas in 1974 in developmental and child psychology. Similarly, Lynn sent a message to the world that women could not only survive, but excel in academic and professional worlds. She too studied sociology at Drake University and received her bachelor's degree in 1961. She continued to demonstrate her academic and intellectual success by completing her master's degree in sociology at the University of Wisconsin. And as Lynn never settled for anything less than the best, she went on to earn her PhD in developmental and child psychology at the University of Kansas in 1973. Pat and Lynn's paths began to align at KU. KU is home to some of the world's best-known behavior analysts, and it was an incredibly exciting time to be a student there. Can you imagine? These two young women were mentored and welcomed into the behavior analysis world by some of the original greats, including Don Baer, Montrose Wolf, Vance Hall, and Todd Risley. Perhaps Don Baer had the greatest influence on Pat and Lynn, mentoring them to become strong scientists and behavior analysts with deep roots in compassion. It is no doubt that Lynn learned to be the incredible researcher and wordsmith that she was from Don Baer. And Pat learned early on to focus on that which mattered most to children and their families, always emphasizing the critical importance of generalization in producing meaningful outcomes. It was at KU that both Pat and Lynn developed a strong interest in research and its application to practice. Lynn focused on engagement and environmental design in gerontology, while Pat grew interested in early childhood education. Ultimately, these interests would be merged to produce meaningful outcomes for individuals with autism in their later work. During their early careers, Pat and Lynn took on academic, research, and clinical roles. Pat completed research at the University of Wisconsin and taught at Grandview College. Lynn spent time as a research trainee at the National Institute of Mental Health and taught at Drake University. Together, they pursued research at KU under Todd Risley's mentorship, and they also joined the research team at the Office of Economic Opportunity. Following that, both Pat and Lynn worked at the Minnesota Learning Center. Their experience at this state hospital would actually set their plans in motion to apply behavioral analytic principles to organizational operations. They were absolutely astounded by the lack of effective service delivery they witnessed. And collectively, they decided to change the status of care for people with disabilities using the science of behavior analysis. This would become their lifetime commitment. Pat and Lynn knew that the future of behavior analysis depended upon contact between college students and the content of the science. They systematically engaged in the process of educating students to develop their interest in and motivation to further pursue behavior analytic endeavors. Pat demonstrated this commitment to teaching through her early intern supervisor experience at Trenton State College in the psychology department and as a clinical supervisor at Columbia University. Lynn took on teaching roles at Trenton State College, where she was a supervisory teacher of speech pathology and audiology. Additionally, she became a faculty affiliate at the University of North Texas Center for Behavior Analysis and an adjunct professor at the University of Judaism. Together, they demonstrated leadership in teaching at their alma mater, KU. They also taught in Columbia University's Psychology and Education Department, were field supervisors for Rutgers University and adjunct associate professors at Queens College. In their many academic positions, Pat and Lynn began to sow the seeds of learning in future students who would flourish into recognized behavior analysts, researchers, academicians, and clinicians. The most important years, however, were ahead of them. Although Pat and Lynn had already held research, academic, and clinical positions by 1975, they were eager to make a larger impact. They knew that behavior analysis was a robust scientist, and they were steadfast in their commitment to use this science to improve organizational operations and the quality of life for individuals with developmental disabilities. As Pat and Lynn were beginning their careers as behavior analysts in Wisconsin, Peggy Pauline and Pam Machold were busy trying to change the future for autistic people in New Jersey. As a grandmother and a mother of a young boy with autism, they would not settle for anything less than an appropriate, non-institutional setting where he and others could learn, thrive, and live their best lives. So, in 1970, Peggy and Pam established the Princeton Child Development Institute. Their vision was to create an autism treatment center where the students and their development were the focus of all intervention efforts. After some unsuccessful events at the start of PCDI's development, Peggy and Pam started a nationwide search for an effective educational model and for a leader who could fulfill their mission. Luckily, their search ended in 1975 with the hiring of Pat and Lynn as PCDI's executive directors. Pat and Lynn would bring their behavior analytic expertise to New Jersey to develop one of the finest ABA intervention programs for individuals with autism. They didn't have much to work with, as noted by Dr. Gregory McDuff, PCDI's most recent executive director emeritus, good friend of Pat and Lynn and long-time colleague. They had 6 students, no staff, no money, and a broken-down van. This statement sums up the state of affairs at PCDI in 1975, but Pat and Lynn thought this was the opportunity of a lifetime. They would finally have a chance to take something that was broken and fix it with the tools of behavior analysis. At PCDI, decisions would be made only to benefit the learners. Pat was well known for her strong emphasis on ensuring the work at PCDI was applied in every way. Children, and later adolescents and adults, were at the center of it all. Pat would always ask how any target skill would be beneficial to the child and the family, and how would that skill be practiced under regularly occurring stimulus conditions to ensure the generality of behavior change and maintenance of responding, and what reinforcers would exist to strengthen and maintain that behavior in the natural setting. She always had questions. Lynn, well, she was definitely known as the stickler for science. She was an incredible mentor in that regard. Her office and presence set the occasion for questions about the relationship between variables and outcomes. Her questions always focused on analyzing every relationship between stimuli and responding to ensure the development of effective programming for students. And she did not let it end at analyzing the relationships, but insisted on the accurate translation of verbal discussions into technologically sound response definitions, measurement procedures, and intervention procedures that would ultimately become the building blocks of a strong curriculum based on science that would allow for repeated implementation and reliable outcomes. All in all, they were committed to operating from a scientist-practitioner model. As part of that model, the focus would be on replication and innovation. Pat and Lynn were extraordinary when it came to identifying effective procedures published in the behavior analytic literature and replicating and extending those procedures in an applied setting. At the center of their clinical efforts was the learner. The approach was that every child could learn, and it was the task of the teacher to figure out the most efficient and effective teaching procedures. Every flat data path on a graph set the occasion for analysis of the variables that needed to be manipulated to change that data trend. Excellence was the goal, and nothing less would be accepted. And Pat and Lynn were never too busy or too important to help figure out how to achieve that outcome. It was a moment of pure pleasure and a great opportunity for learning when Pat or Lynn would come and pull a chair up next to the student and model the skills that the teacher needed to display to ensure a positive outcome. Perhaps what was most interesting about Pat and Lynn was the way they managed to weave relationships, compassion, and dignity into every activity. Although compassion is a heavily talked about topic in 2025, this was not the case in the 1970s. But Pat and Lynn understood all too well that relationships were more effective than transactions for all aspects of running an autism intervention program. Once relationships were established, Pat and Lynn investigated and taught a wide variety of pivotal competencies. They endeavored to identify responses that would provide opportunities for students to gain increased access to reinforcers that surrounded them. They taught students to be as self-sufficient as possible, as early as possible, to ensure their dignity and to give them control over as many aspects of their lives as possible. And Pat and Lynn knew the value of teaching learners to communicate, engage socially, and to be as socially competent as possible. In 1993, Lynn and Pat published an article defining critical systems that ensured effective intervention and accountability to quality services. These systems were the organizational practices that ensured every person's success at PCDI. Pat and Lynn created an organization in which job titles set the occasion for the tasks at hand. Staff were not aides, but rather instructors or teachers. Those responsible for developing skills in the instructional staff were not supervisors, but rather trainers and consultants. There were no separate departments for training and evaluation, but rather individuals who were responsible for both developing and assessing skills. And all staff at PCDI, including Pat and Lynn, were appointed on an annual basis to ensure sensitivity to the contingencies that supported the development and maintenance of necessary skill repertoires. They were dedicated to change and expected all staff to deliver both positive and instructive feedback to all other members of the team to ensure positive outcomes for learners. The expectation that all members of the team were responsible for developing all other team members' behavior was quite unique and quite effective. Evaluations were conducted and performance was expected to meet criterion. Goals were set and professional improvement plans were defined and implemented. Input was also sought from all consumer groups, from parents to staff to board members and even funding agencies. Through their efforts, PCDI became an agency based on solid organizational behavior management tenets. At a time that behavior analysis was only beginning to be used in educational settings, Pat and Lynn went beyond the obvious and necessary of the times. They identified a critical set of responses that staff needed to display. Those were professionalism skills. Pat and Lynn modeled professionalism in everything that they did. They were extraordinary in this manner. Well before our field was talking about soft skills and responses related to professional expertise, Pat and Lynn were teaching the staff to communicate effectively, to focus on relationship development, to establish boundaries that ensured maintenance of professional interactions in very closely connected relationships, and to remain accountable for one's own behavior. Pat and Lynn treated every staff member as a behavior analyst and responsible for analyzing and solving problems. And they taught staff strategies to recruit positive reinforcement, saying things like, "You are responsible for your own level of reinforcement." Pat and Lynn effectively balanced relationship development with professional responding. This was not an easy thing to do, but they were experts at it. They set clear expectations, and honestly, all staff did what was expected of them because they valued the reinforcers that Pat and Lynn delivered. Any person who worked with them knew the value of their positive and very contingent, I might add, feedback. They invested in their staff, and they shared special moments with them. In fact, I remember being surprised to be invited to their house with all the rest of the staff the first week of school when I was working there to a party. It was a party to celebrate the start of the year, not the end, but the start of the year and great things to come. See, they were scientists, incredibly talented clinicians, but they were also very special people. Pat and Lynn were also prolific researchers and writers throughout their entire careers. I am not sure how many of you have run an autism intervention program, a business, and a nonprofit fundraising entity, all at the same time, but take it from me, it is amazingly difficult. There is always something that needs to be addressed. There is a student who is not learning. There is a funding agency that wants to ensure your compliance with the established regulations. There's an air conditioning unit that's not functioning, and there's a grant to be written. The last thing you have time for is to read articles, ponder scientific thoughts, and develop research initiatives. But you must. And Pat and Lynn set the finest example in this area as well. They set time to read, to ponder, and to develop research. And as a result, they remained committed to advancing the science of behavior analysis and the state of affairs for autism intervention throughout their entire careers. Pat and Lynn both contributed to the developing science as individuals. They each investigated and wrote extensively. Some of the topics that Pat researched and published on included behavioral ecology, mentorship, social movements in education, and facilitating socialization. Lynn similarly published on a wide variety of topics, including gerontology, recreation, environmental design, residential treatment, behavior, maladaptive behavior, independence, and integration into community and other education settings. But together, they were unstoppable. The list of their scholarly contributions is long, and the topics are so socially relevant. They published in the areas of public policy and human rights, residential programs. In fact, Pat and Lynn opened the first family-style teaching group home in New Jersey based on the teaching family model and demonstrated the benefits of using applied behavior analysis to enable individuals with autism to thrive in their own homes. They also published on home programming and supporting parents, independence, social behavior, communication, autism intervention strategies, and the development of autism agency systems and the success of those models. They were truly scientist practitioners. Pat and Lynn took from the field, and they contributed to the field, ensuring that autism intervention continually developed and evolved. Pat and Lynn were recognized time and time again by a number of agencies and entities for their outstanding contributions to science and to autism intervention. The long list of awards for two women who built and ran an autism intervention agency is really quite astounding. But just to mention a few, in 1988, they were recognized by the state of New Jersey for their research and services to persons with autism. They received the Fred S. Keller Award for Distinguished Contributions to Behavioral Education in 1994. In recognition for their contributions at PCDI, and perhaps one of the awards they were most proud of, they received the SABA Award for enduring programmatic contributions to behavior analysis in 1999, and they were awarded the Alumni Distinguished Achievement Award by the Department of Applied Behavioral Science at KU in 2009. They were quite proud of every one of their awards, and always, just as the kind of people they were, they took time to recognize the efforts of the team who helped them to produce the outcomes they were awarded for. Two of their enduring contributions in autism intervention include the development and use of activity schedules. and to promote independence in learners and the use of scripts and script fading procedures to develop conversational and other communicational skills in autistic individuals. Their initial work in these areas set the occasion for a number of researchers to further investigate the benefits of these tools, and as a result, it is not unusual to see both activity schedules and script fading procedures in place in almost any autism intervention program you visit. Perhaps one of their greatest writings, however, is their articles on system analysis that was published in 1993. And unfortunately, although they were not alive to see the article that was published in 2024, which was really kind of the summary of years and years of hard work of all the people who worked together with them on kind of the implementation of these systems across a number of different programs in different countries, and there were over 10 years of compelling data presented to show that, in fact, these systems could be implemented with fidelity. The outcomes were reliable, and it didn't matter whether you were here in the US or whether you were operating in a culture abroad. Pat and Lynn were visionaries, developing and implementing highly effective autism intervention strategies in a manner unlike any others in their time. Their strong roots in behavior analysis provided them with the rigor and tools to apply the science they were so passionate about to help many along the way. They were strong scientists who used compassion as their compass. Their humble and generous nature were unmatched and used to promote excellence in those around them. What was also quite amazing about these women was their understanding that they needed to develop future leaders if they were ever going to fully accomplish their goals. They promoted development in all areas, including clinical, professional, and research skills. And although Pat and Lynn developed these skills in many along the way, they were particularly committed to elevating women in the field of behavior analysis. They created professional environments that demanded the most of each person, and any venture into further skill development was met with strong expectations and many performance assessments and feedback sessions. But throughout the development process, they were always there. They encouraged achievable goals, contingently delivered rewards, and always promoted independence. As a result, they were able to help the field grow by developing strong leaders and with excellent clinical and scientific skills. Through their efforts, Pat and Lynn ensured that their legacy would maintain, and in fact, that those they mentored would push the limits and extend the model of scientific excellence. Pat and Lynn developed a model for dissemination and refined that model over time. Their dissemination efforts were based strongly on a mentorship system. They freely shared their knowledge, took phone calls and meetings at any time of the day, and visited the programs implementing the model and provided ongoing feedback. And of course, they set standards and required data collection efforts and outcomes to support both the fidelity of the implementation and achievement of outcomes that met those standards. Their last efforts at ensuring the endurance of their hard work to benefit the science of behavior analysis and people with autism was the formation of the Alliance for Scientific Autism Intervention, which I serve as the executive director of. This membership-based organization became yet one more accountability system to ensure the long-term fidelity of the implementation of the model and provided a forum, and still does, for continued collaboration and growth of organizational leaders and the model itself. By now, you can tell that Pat and Lynn, although individual scientists to practitioners, had quite a unique and powerful partnership. Each of them brought their individual talents and humility to every situation. They had their own views and opinions, but they also had a dedication to conversation to come to the most functional and relevant outcome. Pat was often the face of PCDI and represented the work that she and Lynn did together. She was a fierce advocate for clients with an incredible stage presence. She was able to deliver exactly the right message in exactly the right way. She represented the science and the work that they did with absolute eloquence. Pat was well-liked by all. She was highly respected and delivered contingent reinforcement regularly. But she also prompted all of those who worked with her to constantly move forward, always asking the question of, what's next? There was no time to waste, and as she reminded us often, children's lives are at stake. Lynn, on the other hand, was the somewhat quieter of the two. She represented PCDI in their behavior analytic work very well. She would often be found at her desk, pondering deep thoughts, solving incredible challenges, and preparing solutions based on behavior analysis. She encouraged those who worked with her to never just accept, but rather to analyze, and to use that analysis for good to identify meaningful solutions to problems. Her question was always, well, what are we going to do about that? Lynn was the most patient and incredible mentor. If you walked into her office, she immediately looked up with a smile in her bright, beautiful eyes, and she provided the time and space to help junior professionals develop their skill sets. Lynn was an extraordinary writer. She always knew just the right word to use. She wrote and described phenomena with precision and taught many others those skills. Together, they were incredibly powerful. They were inseparable collaborators. Each respected and welcomed the other's contributions. They did engage in debate at many times, for those of us who were lucky to see it, but they always came to a final decision so that they could move in unity to achieve their shared vision. These women were far beyond their time. They took what they learned from their mentors about science and behavior analysis and applied themselves and that knowledge to program design, research, and training. They did this with integrity, compassion, and through the lens of providing individualized care. They gave freely of themselves, guiding and supporting others along the way to ensure both professional and personal growth for those individuals, but always for the benefit of the science and those that the science served. As Dr. Kevin Brothers, who is here with us today, a mentee, a program director, and a really good friend of Pat and Lynn said, Pat and Lynn showed us how science and heart could not only coexist, but thrive together. Pat and Lynn were trailblazing women. They began their academic and professional careers under conditions far different than women face today. They were navigating their professional and personal development as two women in a fairly challenging time. Women were not necessarily welcomed in academia or expected to have professional careers, especially in the sciences. But this did not stop them, or even slow them down, to be honest. They had deep roots in civil rights advocacy and behavior analysis, and this combination could not have been more powerful. Pat and Lynn championed the rights and advancement of those with disabilities, ensuring these individuals had access to that which they deserved, an effective and individualized education. They also championed the rights and advancement of women. They taught, prompted, supported, and mentored many young women and helped them establish themselves as professional and prominent women in behavior analysis. Pat and Lynn had the most special personal and professional relationship. They were deeply devoted to the science of behavior analysis and to one another throughout their lives and work. They are truly deserving of their place in the WIBA Hall of Fame. Their work and lives remind us to pursue precision, dignity, and joy in our work, and to always lead by example. Thank you.
I'm honored to introduce you to the 5th inductee for this year's Hall of Fame, Dr. Nancy Neef. If you want to know who turns me into a fangirl, her name is Nancy Neef. She is a personal and professional hero to me. She has been a trailblazer, and I'm excited to tell you about all of the ways that she has influenced the people who were privileged enough to directly work with her, but also you, whether you know it or not. Now, when I reached out to people who care about Nancy, many of them said, I said, if you have pictures, please share those with me. And I did receive quite a few, but every single one of them said, I'm not sure if I have a picture of her where she's not wearing a mask wearing a mask from her fantastic collection or hiding behind someone's shoulder. So you will see some of a pictorial journey of Nancy's career, but many of the pictures looked just like this. Nancy was born in 1952 to Carol and Alan Neef on the east side of Michigan, for those of you who know about the mitten over here. And she grew up in Grosse Pointe with her siblings Sherry and Art, and she remained in Michigan for college for all of her degrees a little further west at Western Michigan University. She earned her bachelor's, master's, and PhD at Western Michigan University before moving to Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine to complete her postdoctoral fellowship in pediatrics. This is just a weird parallel, different university, but I also completed all of my degrees at the same university and then did my internship and postdoc at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. And I think many of my experiences were easier for me because women like Nancy had been there already establishing patterns and expectations that women could be exceptional and should be given opportunity, and that they would crush it when given that opportunity. She has had several academic and research appointments throughout her career, but there is a good chance that many of you know her primarily through her affiliation at her last academic appointment at The Ohio State University, and that's The Ohio State University. But before that, she held a variety of positions, including serving as the director of research at Pyramid Educational Consultants, which created an intervention that you may have heard of called PECS. She also taught at the University of Pennsylvania, Temple University, SIU Carbondale, and was a senior research psychologist at the Devereaux Foundation. She taught at Johns Hopkins University and the University of Maryland. So her appointment at the Ohio State University was really the culmination of a long line of positions where she taught and influenced many others and established a productive research career. Nancy has received many awards and honors prior to this one. For example, I was privileged to meet her for the first time in 1999 when she received the Western Michigan University Alumni Achievement Award. She also, in 2006, received the APA Division 25 Outstanding Applied Researcher Award. She is a fellow of ABAI. In 2015, she received the Outstanding Mentor Award from ABAI. In 2018, she was honored for the Society for the Experimental Analysis of Behavior, which publishes JEB and JABA, with a very special award, the Vic Ladies Award. This award is given to someone who serves the society, who gives their time, their energy, relentlessly, tirelessly, so that the rest of us have journals to read. So this award is not just about being a prestigious researcher. This award is about being a steward of science so that this foundation continues and so that all of us have the opportunity to benefit. Just this year, she is receiving the Fred S. Keller Behavioral Education Award. I want to provide some context for you for Nancy as a breaker of glass ceilings. She was the first female editor of JABA. She was elected editor of JABA in 1993, and she served from 1993 to 1995. Now let's just think back for a moment and recall when JABA was founded. 1968. So for a very long time, the editorship of this journal was a men's-only club. When you are the first to do something like this, you cannot be just as good as the men. You must be unarguably and indisputably better than all of them and the clear choice for the job. And then maybe you get a shot. Her colleague, Bill Heward, shared this from Nancy's wall in her office, and it shows her climbing the mountain of JABA with her sword and lightning strikes coming down, having ascended the mountain. I'm going to call her the Wonder Woman of JABA. You can see why she's my hero. Now, the other picture is up there because as the fourth female editor of JABA, I would never have been able to hold that position if there had not been a Nancy Neef. It was a privilege and an honor to serve in that role, and I am here today to express gratitude to Nancy for breaking the glass ceiling so that I didn't have to. Nancy is a prolific researcher. In fact, at one time, she was the single most published woman in behavior analysis. She has over 60 peer-reviewed articles, and the vast majority of those appear in JABA. And she's published over 20 books and book chapters, including in these textbooks. So, if you learned about functional assessment and functional analysis from Cooper, Heron, and Heward, make sure you thank Nancy, the author of that chapter, on your way out today. She has been teaching you whether you knew it or not. She also is the author of a variety of textbooks in school psychology and education. And this has been an absolute love of hers, and she has made significant contributions to our educating of teachers, special educators, and school psychologists. I want to talk with you a little bit about some of her research. I hope that you've read it, but if you haven't, you probably want to go check out some of this work. And the reason is because Nancy, I think, really served an important role in being creative with research design and being willing to do research on anything that needed to be researched. Curious and unconstrained by a single linear line of research. So, some of her earlier work made significant inroads in the area of teaching functional skills. Skills that matter deeply to allowing individuals to become independent and have privacy and dignity, no matter what direct care needs they may have. In this article, she and her colleagues, Brian Iwata and Terry Page, were teaching adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities how to use public transportation systems. She also taught children with neurogenic bladder conditions how to self-catheterize so that they would not necessarily have to have a stranger perform such an intimate procedure on them. They could learn to do this for themselves and have that control and dignity and privacy. She also taught children with tracheotomies to self-administer a suctioning procedure, which of course allowed them to live independently outside of constant medical care by others. Let's talk a little bit about some of her work on the dimensions of reinforcement. Nancy, virtually everyone that I interviewed about Nancy mentioned this work. And if you are not familiar with it, I encourage you to become familiar with it. And here's why. If you have ever done a preference assessment and thought, I didn't find any great reinforcers, you might feel stymied. Well, what do I do now? We have this great thing called reinforcement, and I can't find a reinforcer. But what Nancy's work really encourages us and guides us to do is to remember that the quality of the reinforcer, that is, the individual's measured preference for that reinforcer, is not the only important dimension of reinforcement. So if you have only a modest quality reinforcer, you can use what we know about immediacy and magnitude and other dimensions of reinforcement in order to enhance your treatment effects. These articles were done with a variety of different populations, including children with ADHD, impulsive children, children with autism, and they really illustrate why understanding those dimensions of reinforcement is not just a list to memorize for an exam that will get you a credential. They are the conceptual tools that will help you solve problems when it's not easy to find that potent, easily delivered reinforcer. So thank you, Nancy. She also investigated a computer-based assessment to see which of these dimensions of reinforcement different individuals were responsive to. So think about that. How powerful is it to individualize your assessment, to know at the outset of treatment which dimensions of reinforcement an individual will be most responsive to so that you can maximize all of the intervention that you are about to do. So these kinds of advances, yes, in our understanding, but also in our ability to create interesting and creative assessments that guide our intervention is an absolute hallmark of being a behavior analyst. She has done work on teaching academic skills, including spelling, sight word, reading, mathematics, problem solving with word math problems. And I often have thought, I wish some of my elementary school teachers had had the benefit of Nancy's knowledge and wisdom and the research that she conducted as they created my educational environment. I did okay anyway, but for many children, they won't do okay. They need instructional excellence in order to allow them to find school to be an enjoyable and exciting place where they can succeed. And that is something that Nancy has devoted her career to. She has done research on ADHD, impulsivity, self-control, and this research has absolutely informed some of the work that we call today skills-based treatment, where we are teaching tolerance for delay, where we are teaching children to gradually work a little more to get that bigger, better reinforcer later. So if any of these feel like things you'd like to have in your toolbox, this work is there for you in JABA. Now, Nancy became a college teacher and remained a college teacher through much of her career. And she not only did that, she did it tremendously well. We're going to hear quotes from some of her students, but she also doesn't do anything without wanting to know how to do it as well as it can be done. So if you're going to do it, why not investigate that? So she has published several studies on college teaching. The use of interteaching, the use of guided notes, which, by the way, I used both of these strategies when I became a professor at Western Michigan University. So thank you again, Nancy. You made me a better college teacher. She also, anybody think they could benefit from this one? Measuring and reducing college students' procrastination. So just anything that we might need to know something about was fair game for Nancy's brilliance and her creative use of research design. So Nancy, this is a word cloud from the people that I interviewed about you. These people love you, adore you, they thank you, and these words in their respective sizes represent what they said about you. So, caring and humor and brilliant and interested and kind and humble and passionate, but the biggest one is adventurous. So let me introduce you to Nancy the adventurer. No matter how cool you are, Nancy's cooler. Nancy is a licensed pilot. She is a formation skydiver and actually participated in a Guinness Book of Records formation skydive with the largest number of skydivers ever. She is a spelunker and a sea cave diver. She is a whitewater rafter. She is a dog sledder. She has traveled the world to rescue animals like these precious little monkeys. And she also has taken her entire lab for trapeze classes. You're not as cool as Nancy, but we can all aspire to be like Nancy. These are some of the things that the people who love her had to say about her. As a mentor and a friend, James Mindel said, she was the most devoted mentor someone ever had for all of her students, giving of her time, actively involved with students. She made you feel like you were almost one of her children. She was a bright, devoted mentor with high expectations. Joshua Garner said she was a kind person who always made you better, and you knew it. Everyone looked forward to learning from her. She taught me to focus on my scholarship and quality, and to do my research and to do it at a very high level, to really master the understanding of the area as you do your research so that you're able to make meaningful contributions. She insisted that we always take the extra step to read a little more, dig a little deeper. As a mentor and a friend, Stephanie Peterson said Nancy was a role model of integrity and commitment to excellence, standing up for her values in a meaningful and appropriate way and holding high standards. She taught us to be thorough in our pursuit of both clinical work and research, to do the homework, to be prepared, to do it right. She also taught us to work hard and enjoy life, create balance, know the things that matter to you both personally and professionally, and invest your time accordingly. Tracy Sheehan says she treated students as junior colleagues with respect and care and as equals. She has this superpower to school you and give you feedback, but make you feel thankful for the feedback. Always teaching, always supporting. Josh Garner says she was a kind person who I'm sorry, that's a duplicate. Let's move on. These people actually gave me messages to give to Nancy on her special day. Jonathan Ivey says, Nancy, you have my truly heartfelt, authentic appreciation for the professional and personal paths that you helped me achieve, because you are directly connected to and influential of those paths in every way. Tracy Joan says, Nancy, so much of what I accomplished is due to your influence in graduate school and because you have stayed with me throughout my life. I wouldn't be the behavior analyst and person that I am without having had you in my life. And Laurice Joseph says, thank you so much, Nancy, for being such a wonderful colleague and giving me great opportunities that shaped my research career and experience as a faculty member. You included me when you didn't have to, and it was so appreciated. Stephanie Peterson, who is now an associate dean at Western Michigan University, mentioned that Nancy helped her remain as an academic administrator when it can be frustrating as an academic administrator. So these are words of wisdom from Nancy, and I think perhaps they may resonate with you in something that you are experiencing. Keep in mind that I'm going to ask you to imagine they is whoever's doing something you wish they weren't doing, or in a way that you wish they weren't doing it. Keep in mind that they are behaving under contingencies like anyone else. So we have to understand those contingencies and figure out where their reinforcers are and perhaps help them to get those reinforcers. And you can't change the system if you aren't in it. If you want to make change in the system, you have to be in the system. And it helps if you eventually run the system. So let me wrap up by saying that in every conversation, people spoke about ways that Nancy was not only a mentor to them and a teacher with exceptionally high standards, but she was a human being that knew them personally and helped them in times of crisis or pain or challenge, and brought them joy and excitement and served as a role model for them. One of the things that they said about Nancy is that she's always trying something new. She's always wanting to learn something new. And one of them asked Nancy at some point, why are you always doing all this new stuff, whether it's skydiving or cave diving or whatever? And she said, I like to continually be learning something new because it reminds me what it's like to not be good at something, but hopefully to be able to learn it. And if you're going to be a teacher, that's exactly the empathy that you want to have for those that you teach. So Nancy, congratulations on being inducted into the 2025 Women in Behavior Analysis Hall of Fame.
I learned so much about myself that I didn't know from this. And thank you to my private investigator. That was, that was really, really special. I can't tell you how touched and how honored I am by this. And all my contributions have been from standing on the shoulders of giants who were honored here today. And I feel so privileged to be in their company. Just as examples, much of my work teaching children with autism was inspired by Krantz and McClannahan. And now as I moved into retirement and I'm focusing more on volunteer work with wildlife rescue and rehabilitation, I am inspired by the work of Karen Pryor. So it's just such an honor to be here, and I'm so touched and moved, and thank you very much.
So when we came up with this idea of a Hall of Fame of 5-6 years ago, we were really most devoted to sharing some history that our audience might not know about and to honoring truly deserving women. We've now had the privilege to induct all of these women, and there will be a new class next year. We hope that you will join us later for our Hall of Fame reception, which is combined with the WIBA Social. That's going to be today from 7 to 9 in salons I and H. That'll be opened up together. So please do join us for food, drinks, games. We're going to have a Women's Hall of Fame bingo. So please join us, and Nancy, if you are willing to join us, I'm sure there are many people in this audience that would be honored to meet you. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful evening.